Hardtack and Coffee, A Soldier's Life in the Civil War is a classic memoir written by John D. Billings, first published in 1887. This engaging account provides a vivid and often humorous look into the daily lives of Union soldiers during the American Civil War. If you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe. These are Billings' words. Let's begin. The saying necessity is the mother of invention finds no better illustration than war. This chapter will explore some examples from the Civil War that highlight this principle. When the call to arms first sounded, men on both sides of Mason and Dixon's line were summoned to take the field. Almost immediately, there arose a demand for a new class of materials, the tools and weapons of war, unlike anything required in the previous 50 years. Many of the arms available at the time had already been sent south before the outbreak of hostilities. These weapons were largely outdated, and the sudden demand for new arms spurred inventors to create better ones. Throughout history, items in high demand are the ones most likely to be improved by invention until they approach the limits of perfection. This was certainly true of the materials of warfare during the Civil War. The pressure to adapt and improve was evident in many areas, but it was perhaps most noticeable in the innovations made to arms, ammunition, and ordnance to better suit the needs of the moment. At the start of the war in 1861, the limited supply of muskets remaining in government arsenals was used to equip the first troops sent to the front lines. Manufacturing began on an unprecedented scale, but the government workshops, even operating night and day, could not meet the enormous demand. Private enterprises stepped in to fill the gap. For example, Grover and Baker, a sewing machine company in Roxbury, Massachusetts, converted their factory into a rifle manufacturing operation, employing hundreds of workers. This was just one of many similar efforts in the region. In South Boston, Alger's foundry produced vast quantities of cannon, while massive steam hammers forged the heavy shafts needed for gunboats and monitors. The descendants of Paul Revere shifted some of their copper production from ship sheathing to casting brass 12-pounders, commonly called Napoleons. Many Confederate soldiers met their end from shrapnel or canister shot fired from cannons stamped with Revere Copper Company, Canton, Massachusetts. The plain, smooth-bore Springfield muskets soon became Springfield rifles as rifling technology was applied. The same process transformed cannons, making them more accurate and effective. Muzzle-loading rifles evolved into breech loaders, and some even advanced to repeating rifles. By 1864, certain Union cavalry regiments were equipped with Henry rifles capable of firing 16 shots before needing to be reloaded. These rifles were so advanced that Confederate soldiers joked that the Yankees loaded them in the morning and fired all day. During a recent visit to Chattanooga, Tennessee, I met Captain Ford of the old 1st Georgia Regulars, a Confederate regiment with a distinguished record. He recounted his first encounter with repeating rifles near Olustee, Florida. While skirmishing with the Massachusetts regiment, he noticed how difficult it was to force their withdrawal, as they seemed to reload almost instantly and never ceased firing. To investigate, he ordered his men to focus their fire on a single Union skirmisher. After the soldier fell, they recovered his Spencer repeating rifle, a 7- or 8-shot weapon, and carried it as a curiosity for some time. The Navy experienced equally rapid advancements. At the outbreak of the war, the fleet consisted mostly of outdated ships of the line, frigates, and screw steamers, none of which were suitable for the kind of warfare required. The conflict demanded vessels capable of operating in rivers, bays, and along coastlines, where deeper draft ships could not venture. As a result, sloops of war, gunboats, mortar boats, double-enders, and ironclads were developed. With the advent of more powerful naval armament, the search for less vulnerable ships intensified. The clash between the Yankee Cheese Box, the USS Monitor, and the rebel ram Virginia, formerly the Merrimac, proved a turning point. Monitors, ironclad warships, became the mainstay of the Navy. These developments are well documented in history, but they underscore the maxim that necessity drives invention. Not all inventions were practical or long-lasting. Some creations were products of opportunists seeking to profit from soldiers eager to prepare for the hardships of military life. These inventors introduced countless gadgets, many of which proved to be useless in the field. One popular item was a combination knife, fork, and spoon. These all-in-one utensils were heavily marketed at state training camps and purchased by nearly every new recruit. The convenience they promised made them an attractive option. However, most soldiers quickly abandoned these utensils after their first camp experience, as they proved cumbersome and impractical in active service. Another product, which I purchased myself, was a portable water filter. It consisted of a small gutta-percha tube about 15 inches long, with a metallic mouthpiece at one end and a suction chamber at the other. The chamber contained a perforated end with a piece of backing as a filter, and there was an air chamber midway along the tube. While innovative in concept, I rarely used it, perhaps half a dozen times at most. By the time my unit broke camp before the Gettysburg campaign, I had sent it, along with other unnecessary items, back home. I recall another water filter that was somewhat simpler than the one I described earlier. It featured a mouthpiece connected to rubber tubing, which was attached to a small conical piece of pumice stone that filtered the water. Like the first design, this filter was entirely impractical and never saw significant use. The rapid improvements made in firearms during the Civil War extended to all categories, including revolvers. For a time, Colt's revolvers dominated the field, but soon they faced stiff competition from manufacturers like Smith & Wesson, Remington, and others. Thousands of revolvers were sold monthly, and it was a rare sight to find a new soldier who did not carry one, whether purchased himself or gifted by concerned family members, friends, or even enthusiastic business associates. Of course, owning a revolver required ammunition, which was eagerly procured to complete the personal arsenal. For some soldiers, this arsenal also included dirk knives or large Arkansas toothpicks hanging from their belts, adding a touch of menace to their appearance. At one early war meeting in Ashby, Massachusetts, the town voted to equip each volunteer with a revolver, a Bowie knife, a Bible, and $10 in cash. What many of these well-equipped soldiers failed to consider was the weight of their government-issued arms and equipment. By the time a soldier carried the muskets, ammunition, and gear provided by the military, the additional load of personal weaponry became burdensome. The reality of warfare often left little opportunity or need to use these extras. Soldiers from later regiments in 1862 learned this lesson either through correspondence with those already at the front or by observing others who had experienced combat. However, in 1861 and 1862, countless revolvers were carried to the front, only to be discarded, given away, or sent back home. Revolvers were likely cheaper in Virginia during those years than anywhere else in the country. Another invention, popular enough to turn a profit for its manufacturers, was steel armor. Some men were eager to serve but preferred to do so with additional assurance of safety. Steel vests, priced at about $12, were marketed as a way to protect oneself from bullets. These vests, often accompanied by steel greaves for the legs, found a market among men who wanted to be heroes but were unwilling to take all the risks associated with combat. While the vests provided some comfort to their wearers, they came with significant drawbacks. Soldiers wearing them often likened the sensation to being encased in an airtight stove. Additionally, these vests became the target of ridicule. Fellow soldiers joked that such armor would be more useful if worn on the back during battle. The vests were also heavy, taking up valuable space in a soldier's knapsack. Many were abandoned before departure or shortly after arriving at the front. Officers, who had more room for baggage, retained them longer, but even they discarded the vests when forced to lighten their loads. One of the earliest and least practical inventions adopted by some troops was the havelock. This white linen covering for caps included a cape to shield the neck from the sun. The design originated in India, where British troops used it during the 1857 rebellion. While it may have been effective in eastern climates, the havelock proved entirely unsuited for the American South. Entire regiments marched to war with them, but these garments rarely lasted more than 3 months. Similarly impractical were patent leather haversacks, featuring compartments designed to neatly store rations. Soldiers who purchased these fancy haversacks soon discovered they were impractical. Regulations eventually required all troops to adopt the standard painted cloth haversacks issued by the military. These simple bags, about a foot square with a broad shoulder strap, became a catch-all for food and utensils. After a long march, the contents inevitably jumbled into a chaotic mix. Occasionally, an invention proved genuinely useful. One such example was a compact writing kit I still own. When rolled up, it measures 8.5 inches long and 2 inches in diameter. Unrolled, it serves as a small writing tablet complete with compartments for pens, ink, and paper. This kit became my desk when no better surface was available. Some soldiers, particularly those in Zouave regiments, adopted the Turkish fez with its distinctive tassel. While these caps were comfortable for lounging in camp, they were not practical on the march or in combat. Most disappeared within 3 months of campaigning. Many soldiers in 1862 avoided the regulation forage caps issued by the government, opting instead for the more stylish McClellan caps sold by hatters. Unfortunately, these caps often faded within weeks, unlike the government-issue caps, which, though coarse and unfashionable, retained their color and durability. Soldiers often personalized their caps with insignias indicating their unit and branch of service. Infantrymen displayed a bugle, artillerymen crossed cannons, and cavalrymen crossed sabers. Another curious feature of early war preparations was the meticulous labeling of equipment. Knapsacks were prominently marked with the soldier's regiment, company, and state, such as Co. B, 33rd New York Regiment or 10th Massachusetts Battery for artillery units. Haversacks and canteens were often similarly labeled. These markings were thought necessary to identify equipment, but few survived the rigors of war. Knapsacks were frequently discarded in favor of simple blanket rolls, and haversacks and canteens were replaced as needed. It was not uncommon to see Confederate prisoners using captured Union knapsacks, complete with their original markings. Light artillerymen initially wore brass scales on their shoulders, intended as protection against saber strikes. However, these scales quickly disappeared, as experienced soldiers ridiculed them. The scales served no practical purpose and were seen as markers of inexperience. It has often been said that the South might not have been defeated in the Civil War had it not been for the steady and indispensable contributions of the mule to the Union Army. While it is impossible to quantify the exact impact of their service, both sides acknowledge the mule's immense value during the war. Kentucky is the leading mule-producing state in the Union, followed closely by Missouri. St. Louis, in particular, is considered one of the best mule markets in the world. The entire southwestern United States contributes to mule production, though Kentucky is known for breeding the largest and best specimens. Smaller mules, often the result of a cross with Mexican Mustangs, were also widely used during the war. General Ulysses S. Grant mentions in his memoirs that while Taylor's army was stationed in Matamoros, Texas, mules were purchased from Mexican smugglers at prices ranging from $8 to $11 each. Kentucky, however, remained the primary source of mules for the western states, the South, and the federal government during the conflict. Initially, Kentucky's government, led by Governor Magoffin and a legislature sympathetic to neutrality, resisted selling mules to the Union. However, as the state firmly aligned itself with the Union cause, the federal government began purchasing mules in increasing numbers, continuing until the war's end. When the war broke out, thousands of soldiers poured into Washington to defend the capital and later deployed to other parts of the South. To supply these troops with rations, forage, and equipment, the Union Army required thousands of wagons. Some regiments brought wagons from their home states, but most depended on government-provided transport. Initially, both horses and mules were used to pull these wagons. Over time, the superior endurance and utility of mules became apparent, and they gradually replaced horses in all military trains. Mules were particularly suited for hauling ammunition, forage, supplies, and bridge-building equipment. They could navigate rough terrain that would often lame or injure horses. Additionally, mules tolerated harsh conditions, surviving on sparse or poor-quality feed, or even no feed at all. Drivers often cut branches to feed their mules when forage was scarce. One mule was even known to eat part of its driver's army overcoat, leaving the man understandably upset. A 6-mule team was organized with careful consideration of the animal's size and roles. The largest, strongest mules were placed at the pole, closest to the wagon. Slightly smaller mules, known as the swing pair, came next, and the smallest pair served as the leaders. This arrangement allowed the lighter, quicker leaders to find firm footing in muddy terrain and help pull the heavier pole mules through difficult spots. The pole mules, in turn, helped control the wagon on steep descents, working with the brake to steady the load. Experienced drivers could handle these teams with remarkable skill. The driver rode the left pole mule, holding a single rein in his left hand, which controlled the left lead mule. By pulling the rein, the team turned left. By giving short jerks combined with verbal commands, a unique mix of gibberish and grunts learned on the job, the driver signaled a turn to the right. The lead mule's bits were connected by an iron bar, ensuring synchronized movement. The driver also held a black snake whip in his right hand, which he used when necessary to correct or motivate the team. When mules were delivered to the army, they were held in corrals. Drivers needing replacements would visit these enclosures to make their selections. Inside the corral, a secondary fence divided the space, with bars at 2 points to isolate the chosen mule. Once the mule was driven into the small enclosed area, the driver bridled it from the safety of the fence. This precaution was necessary because, as every driver knew, mules could be unpredictable. Not every selection was a success. Some mules were docile and cooperative, while others proved stubborn or mischievous. A tricky mule might stop suddenly, brace its front legs, and refuse to move, leaving the driver at risk of an unexpected dismount. Drivers often joke that in these moments, a mule truly became a stubborn fact, as humorist Josh Billings put it. The driver's whip, or black snake, was the ultimate tool of persuasion. A well-timed crack near a mule's ears, an area believed to house their reasoning faculties, usually resolved any issues. The whip, combined with the driver's distinct mule handling commands, could transform a chaotic tangle of mules into a perfectly aligned team in moments. When not working, mules were usually tied to the pole of their wagon. Despite their reputation for stubbornness, mules were playful animals. In their downtime, they often tumbled, rolled, and bit each other, creating a scene of apparent chaos. However, the appearance of a driver with the black snake whip quickly restored order. The mules would untangle themselves and stand in perfect alignment, as if on inspection. An educated mule driver, within his sphere, was as competent a disciplinarian as a regimental colonel. However, the obedience he commanded from his mules was not achieved solely through applications of the black snake whip or even through the most forceful commands delivered in the unique mule dialect. He was feared by his charges for another reason: his unparalleled talent for profanity. Old soldiers will attest that a mule driver's ability to swear could rival the most formidable artillery barrage. I have witnessed the most stubborn mules spring into action, pulling with fierce determination, when one of these verbal Gatling guns of curses was unleashed. Some might argue that it was the threat of the whip that spurred the mule into motion, but I prefer to think the animal was motivated by a sense of moral improvement. In all seriousness, mule drivers were notorious for their colorful language. When provoked, they could turn the air around them a deep shade of blue, unmatched by any other group in the Army. A theory once floated suggests that if all the mule drivers in the Army of the Potomac had been placed in the trenches around Petersburg and Richmond in late 1864, armed with nothing but their oaths, and had unleashed their full verbal fury at the enemy, the Confederates would have either surrendered on the spot or fled to the safety of the Blue Ridge Mountains. While there may have been devout mule drivers in Sherman's army, I never encountered one in the East. Even if some began their service with a measure of piety, they certainly abandoned it by the time they left their post. Still, they could take solace in General Grant's acknowledgement of their skill. He credited them with being able to swear a mule team out of the mud when no other method would work. The mule was as renowned for its unpredictability as it was for its strength. It could not be trusted, even when appearing docile or affectionate. Its reputation as a kicker was legendary, earning it the title of the mugwump of the service. A mule that did not kick was a curiosity, and stories of their antics abound. After the Battle of Antietam, a colored mule driver approached his team, only to be immediately knocked to the ground by a swift, unexpected kick from one of the animals. Undeterred, the driver retrieved a heavy stake from his wagon, returned to the mule, and delivered a stunning blow to its head. The mule collapsed momentarily, then stood, shook its head, and the two seemed to reach an understanding. Peace was restored, and they resumed their duties without further incident. Another example of misplaced trust involved the cook of the 60th New York Regiment during the 1862 Antietam campaign. The cook had secured a respectable-looking mule, loaded it with all the paraphernalia of the cookhouse, and proudly perched himself among the supplies. The mule behaved well until they reached the middle of the pontoon bridge over the Potomac at Harper's Ferry. Without warning, the mule brayed loudly, kicked up its hind legs, and tossed its entire burden, cook, utensils, and all, into the river. The cook, heavily weighed down by mess kettles, might have drowned if not for the quick intervention of his comrades. Despite this mishap, he remounted the mule and continued. However, the scenario repeated itself at the Shenandoah River, after which the cook abandoned the mule entirely. Josh Billings, the humorist, aptly captured the mule's temperament. He noted that, if a mule neither kicked nor bit, one should watch it closely to discover where its malice lay. Billings also quipped, "To break a mule, begin at his head. To find the solid contents of a mule's hind leg, feel of it closely. The only thing that makes a mule respectable is the accuracy of his kicking. A mule is sure-footed. I've seen one kick a man 15 feet off, 10 times in a second. The mule's legs and feet might have been small, but its ambition to kick was immense. Its accuracy was astonishing. Mule drivers claimed a mule could kick a fly off its ear with unerring precision while walking. However, the exact range of its kicks often required expensive first-hand testing. One driver I knew was knocked over by a mule's hind foot while standing directly in front of it, demonstrating their surprising reach. Given their temperament, shoeing a mule required careful techniques. There were two common methods, either slinging the animal as one would an ox, with its feet strapped securely, or casting it by using a noose to immobilize its legs. Though the mule would resist fiercely at first, once subdued, it became as docile as a kitten under the blacksmith's care. However, as soon as it regained its footing, the mule's memory seemed to reset, and its kicking resumed as if nothing had happened. The mule's ears, disproportionately large, are a distinguishing feature, but its voice surpasses even that in magnitude. A mule's bray is an unforgettable experience, often described as ear-splitting. Among quadrupeds, it holds the same unrivaled distinction that the guinea fowl does among barnyard birds. Just as the ancient Greeks said Pericles could thunder and agitate all of Greece with his eloquence, so too could a mule silence all competition with its bray. It was a sound so powerful and piercing that it seemed rivaled only by a crashing thunderstorm. Mules proved invaluable not only in the wagon trains but also under pack saddles, where they carried essential supplies. Each regiment typically had a mule bringing up the rear on marches, loaded with the implements of the cookhouse. At times, the mule would be so heavily burdened that only its head and tail were visible. These mules were often accompanied by a colored handler who managed their movements. However, these creatures could occasionally display strong-willed behavior. For example, while crossing a stream, a mule might decide to lie down in the middle, despite the handler's frantic protests. Soldiers marching past would add to the scene with a chorus of banter, though no amount of shouting or cajoling would move the mule until it was ready, or until its entire load was unloaded and placed on dry land. Mules and ammunition and ration delivery. When supply wagons could not safely approach the front lines during battle, mules were fitted with 2 ammunition boxes, one strapped to each side to balance their load. In this way, they supplied troops even in the most dangerous conditions. At the intense Battle of Spotsylvania on May 12, 1864, a steady line of pack mules carried ammunition up an open ravine for nearly 20 hours, resupplying Union forces engaged in fierce combat. Similarly, mules delivered rations under dire circumstances. Occasionally, one would lie down under its burden and stubbornly refuse to move, to the great frustration of its handlers. As General Ulysses S. Grant noted in his memoirs, I am not aware of ever having used a profane expletive in my life, but I would have the charity to excuse those who may have done so if they were in charge of a train of Mexican pack mules at the time, referencing his own experiences during the Mexican War. The safe rear lines. While mules preferred the safety of the rear, the Civil War made it clear that there was no truly safe rear. During Lee's final retreat, my company often delighted in seeing the chaos that erupted when our artillery targeted retreating Confederate wagon trains. A few well-placed shells sent the mules into a frenzy, rendering them unmanageable. Drivers, seeing the futility of control, often had no choice but to let the mules bolt if there was space ahead. In narrow areas, however, a panicked mule team could block the entire road, sometimes leading to the capture of the rest of the train. Mules and combat limitations. Mules were entirely unsuited for cavalry service due to their skittishness under fire. In battle, they were as likely to unseat their riders as they were to charge wildly into enemy lines. Their erratic behavior made them equally unsuitable for artillery service, as they posed a risk of disrupting the battery's operation. During Lee's retreat in April 1865, we came across wagons and a battery of steel Armstrong-pattern guns that Sheridan's troops had captured. The guns appeared brand new, likely imported from England, and were drawn by a motley mix of horses and mules. It seemed clear that the mules were only meant for transport and not intended for use in combat. Even under such circumstances, the emaciated condition of the mules was shocking. They had been on the move for over a week with minimal rest or food. Despite their depleted state, their legendary kicking ability likely remained intact. The mystery of dead mules. Among old soldiers, a common question arises: what happened to all the army mules? Many veterans claim they never saw a dead mule during the war, though they recall seeing the carcasses of horses strewn along the march. Some even jest that mules were immortal, citing absurd anecdotes like the time a soldier saw only the hoofs of a mule, leading him to conclude that the animal had kicked off its own feet and vanished. In reality, mules did succumb to disease and exhaustion. glanders and a condition known as black tongue claimed many of them. Yet, their toughness and resilience left a lasting impression, earning them widespread respect for their service. The charge of the Mule Brigade. Mules even had their moment of heroism. On the night of October 28, 1863, during the Battle of Wauhatchie in Tennessee, General Gary's division of the 12th Corps repelled an attack by Longstreet's forces. In the chaos, approximately 200 mules, frightened by the noise of battle, stampeded into Wade Hampton's Confederate troops. The panicked animals caused such confusion that part of the enemy force retreated, mistakenly believing they were under cavalry attack. This incident inspired a humorous poem, modeled after Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. While the mules may not have been cavalry, their unintentional bravery turned the tide in a moment of battle. Half a mile, half a mile. Half a mile onward. Right through the rebel line. Rush the 200. Forward the Mule Brigade. Charge for the guns. They neighed. Straight for the cannon's mouth. Went the 200. That concludes the 9th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.